People said the monster inside Moretti Manor stopped being human 5 years ago. The truth was worse. He stopped letting himself feel anything at all. Rain slid down the taxi window in crooked silver lines as I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched the north side of Manhattan disappear behind us. The driver kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror like he wanted to ask why a waitress in a black uniform was headed toward the most feared estate in the city at almost midnight. But smart New Yorkers knew when to keep quiet, especially about the Morettis. My phone buzzed again inside my apron pocket. Darren. Third call in 20 minutes. I muted it without looking. My wrist ached where his fingers had grabbed me before my shift. The skin beneath my sweater sleeve still burned faintly, tender and swollen in the exact shape of his hand. You listening to me? The driver asked. I blinked. Sorry. I said they got weird rules up there. Don't wander around. Don't ask questions. And if you see Mr. Moretti, he hesitated. Try not to stare. The gates appeared a few seconds later. Tall black iron. Motion sensors. Stone walls wrapped in ivy darkened by rain. The mansion beyond them looked less like a home and more like something carved out of old money and bad memories. Massive windows glowed dim gold against the storm, but somehow the place still felt dead, like the lights were only pretending. Security checked my ID twice before letting me through. By the time I stepped inside, my sneakers were damp from the rain and my nerves were shredded thin. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. A fireplace taller than my apartment crackled softly across the room. Men in tailored black suits moved through the halls without speaking louder than whispers. Everything smelled expensive. Cedarwood, smoke, red wine, silence. Kitchen staff downstairs. A woman instructed briskly. Private dining service begins at 11. You will only speak when addressed. I nodded quickly. My throat felt tight. The entire mansion carried this strange pressure, like breathing too loudly might upset something dangerous sleeping beneath the walls. For the first hour, I stayed invisible. Refilled glasses. Cleared plates. Avoided eye contact. The guests were politicians, investors, men with polished watches and cold smiles. But none of them mattered. Everyone in that dining room orbited around the man seated at the far end of the table. Caius Moretti. I recognized him immediately, even though he hadn't appeared in public in years. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit. One hand resting near a crystal tumbler untouched for nearly an hour. He didn't speak much. Didn't need to. The room adjusted itself around his silence. I kept my eyes lowered every time I passed him, but I could still feel him somehow, like standing too close to a storm. Then my phone buzzed again, hard against my pocket. My hand jerked instinctively. The wine bottle slipped slightly in my grip, and as I caught it, my sweater sleeve pulled halfway up my arm. Purple fingerprints flashed against pale skin beneath the chandelier light. I froze. So did the room. The buzzing in my pocket stopped. Somewhere across the table, a chair scraped softly against marble. I looked up before I could stop myself. Caius Moretti was staring directly at my wrist. Not casually, not curiously. His expression had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that comes right before glass breaks. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his chair. One of the men beside him immediately straightened. Sir. Caius ignored him. His pale green eyes stayed locked on my arm as he crossed the room toward me with measured steps. My pulse stumbled hard against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to cover the bruise. To apologize. To disappear. I tugged my sleeve down too quickly. It's nothing, I blurted out quietly. His gaze lifted to my face at last. Cold. Sharp. Exhausted in a way that made him look dangerous and broken at the same time. He stopped inches away from me, close enough that I caught the scent of smoke and expensive cologne beneath the rain. Then, in a voice so calm it terrified me more than shouting ever could, he said, Look at me when you lie. My mouth went dry so fast it hurt. Nobody in the room moved while Caius Moretti stared at me like he could see straight through skin and lies and every excuse I had ever rehearsed in bathroom mirrors. The chandelier light caught the faint silver at his temples as he waited for an answer I could not give him. I walked into a cabinet. I whispered finally. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not because he believed me, because he did not. One of the men near the fireplace shifted uncomfortably. Another lowered his wine glass without making a sound. The entire dining room felt suspended in glass. Caius glanced once toward my hidden wrist before looking back at me. Do you bruise often from furniture? Heat crawled into my face. I should get back to work. I reached for the wine bottle again, desperate to escape, but his hand moved first. Not grabbing me, not forcing me, just resting over the neck of the bottle before I could touch it. Calm, controlled, somehow worse than anger. What is your name? Celine. Last name? Whitaker. He repeated it quietly, like he was filing it somewhere permanent inside his head. Then he stepped aside. Go home tonight in one of my cars. I blinked at him. That is not necessary. It was not a request. Something sharp flickered behind his eyes, then vanished just as quickly. Exhaustion, maybe. Or memory. I could not tell. One of the security men approached immediately. I will have Dominic take her. Caius nodded once and returned to the table without another word. The room breathed again the second he sat down. Conversation slowly restarted in hushed tones. Crystal clinked softly against plates. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every nerve in my body stayed tight for the rest of the shift. I could feel eyes following me constantly, though whenever I looked toward Caius, he seemed focused on nothing at all. He barely touched his dinner, barely spoke. Sometimes he just stared into the fire beside the dining room windows while rain streaked the glass behind him like melting silver. By 1:30 in the morning, the guests finally began leaving. Black sedans disappeared down the curved driveway one after another while staff cleared the last dishes in silence. I grabbed my coat from the downstairs locker room as quickly as possible, praying I could slip out before anyone stopped me again. But when I reached the front entrance, a tall man in a dark wool coat was already waiting beside a black Escalade. Miss Whitaker. I froze. He opened the passenger door politely. Mr. Moretti insists. I live 20 minutes away, I said carefully. I can take the subway. You will not be taking the subway tonight. The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach. Outside, rain still hammered against the stone steps of the mansion. Thunder rolled low over the city. I climbed into the SUV because refusing felt impossible somehow. The leather seats smelled expensive. Warm air brushed softly against my cold hands. We drove through the iron gates without music or conversation. Halfway downtown, my phone buzzed again. Darren. Then again. Then again. 6 missed calls lit the screen in less than a minute. Dominic noticed without reacting. Would you like me to answer it? No, too fast. Too nervous. I swallowed hard and shoved the phone back into my pocket. But when we stopped at a red light near Lexington Avenue, headlights suddenly appeared behind us. A silver Ford sedan. My stomach dropped instantly. Darren leaned on his horn once. Long aggressive. Dominic checked the mirror calmly. Friend of yours? My wrist throbbed beneath my sleeve. Just keep driving. The light turned green. Dominic accelerated smoothly through the intersection while the Ford stayed glued behind us. Another horn blast cut through the rain. Then my phone rang again. This time Dominic glanced at the caller ID before handing the phone toward me. Darren's name glowed across the screen beside a picture of us from last summer back, when I still believed apologies meant change. Dominic's voice stayed perfectly even. Miss Whitaker. He looked back at the road. Mr. Moretti does not like people who leave marks. The rest of the drive felt too quiet after that. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while Manhattan blurred past in silver and gold reflections, but all I could hear was Dominic's sentence repeating in my head. Mr. Moretti does not like people who leave marks. Not men who hurt women. Not bruises hidden under sleeves. Not fear disguised as clumsiness. My phone finally stopped ringing somewhere near Midtown, though I knew Darren had not given up. He never gave up. That was the problem. Dominic pulled over outside my apartment building at exactly 2:14 in the morning. The old brick complex looked smaller beside the black Escalade, almost embarrassed by comparison. One flickering hallway light buzzed above the entrance while rainwater overflowed the curb in dirty streams. Thank you for the ride, I said quietly as I reached for the door handle. Dominic handed me a small white envelope instead. From Mr. Moretti. My pulse skipped. I do not want anything from him. Take it anyway. I hesitated before finally accepting it. Thick paper. Heavy. Expensive. My name written across the front in sharp black ink. Celine Whitaker. Dominic waited until I stepped safely inside the building before driving away. I climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs with my heart pounding harder at every landing. Darren's boots sat outside my apartment door. My stomach twisted instantly. He was inside. I unlocked the door slowly and stepped into darkness, smelling faintly of beer and cigarette smoke. The television glowed softly in the living room. Darren sat on the couch in gray sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, one arm stretched across the cushions like he owned the air itself. His eyes lifted the second he saw me. "You turned your phone off." "Not a question." I dropped my purse onto the counter carefully. "I was working until 2 in the morning in a billionaire's mansion." His voice stayed calm in the dangerous way I hated most. "That was a catering shift." He stood slowly. "You think I am stupid?" I took a step backward automatically. He noticed. They always notice fear. "Darren, I am tired." His eyes narrowed toward the envelope in my hand. "What is that?" "Nothing." "Wrong answer." His jaw tightened immediately. "Who drove you home?" "A security guy from the event." "You got into a car with another man?" I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The shift. The invisible line where normal conversation stopped existing. "Please do not start this tonight." Darren laughed once under his breath and walked toward me. My spine locked. Every muscle prepared before my mind could. He reached for my wrist, and I flinched before he even touched me. The movement changed something in his expression. Not guilt. Annoyance. "You act like I am some monster." I stared at the floor because looking directly at him always made things worse. "I never said that." His fingers closed around my injured wrist anyway. Not hard enough to injure. Just enough to remind me he could. "Then stop acting scared of me." A knock echoed suddenly through the apartment. 3 slow taps against the front door. Darren frowned immediately. "Who the hell is here at this hour?" I pulled my wrist free and stepped back. Another knock came before either of us moved. Calm. Patient. Darren yanked the door open with visible irritation. 2 men stood in the hallway wearing dark wool coats untouched by the rain. I recognized one of them instantly from the mansion security team. The taller man spoke first. "Delivery for Miss Whitaker." Darren looked them over suspiciously. "It is 2 in the morning." The man did not blink. "Mr. Moretti dislikes delays." Silence swallowed the hallway. Darren stepped aside reluctantly while the second man carried in a large rectangular box wrapped in black ribbon. Expensive. Elegant. Completely out of place inside my tiny apartment. They placed it carefully on the kitchen counter before leaving without another word. Darren shut the door hard behind them. "What the hell is this?" My hands trembled slightly as I untied the ribbon. Inside the box sat a dark green cashmere sweater folded neatly beside a smaller velvet case. Confused, I opened it. A delicate silver bracelet rested inside with one sentence engraved beneath it in clean, sharp lettering. "For the wrist you keep hiding." Darren went completely still beside me, and for the first time since I met him, I realized he looked afraid. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after the door closed. Rain rattled softly against the apartment windows while the silver bracelet gleamed beneath the weak kitchen light, like something unreal sitting in the middle of my cluttered counter. Darren stared at it with his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Rich man. Dangerous man. Powerful man. The kind of man people cross streets to avoid. Slowly, Darren looked at me. "What exactly happened tonight?" I folded the bracelet case shut carefully to stop my hands from shaking. "Nothing." "Do not lie to me, Celine." His voice sharpened slightly. "You think some billionaire sends gifts to waitresses for no reason?" "I did not ask for anything." "Then why does he know about your wrist?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. "Because Caius Moretti noticed things nobody else did. Because he looked at me like Bruises offended him personally. Because for one terrifying second inside that mansion, I felt safer standing beside a rumored monster than I had in my own apartment for months." Darren stepped closer. "Did you tell him something about me?" "No." "Did you make me sound abusive?" The word landed hard in the silence between us. I looked away immediately. That was enough answer for him. He laughed once under his breath, pacing toward the living room windows while dragging a hand through his hair. "Unbelievable." "Darren, no, seriously. You embarrass me to some rich psychopath, and now I have strangers showing up at my apartment at 2 in the morning." "It is my apartment too." The second the words slipped out, I regretted them. He turned slowly. "Excuse me." My pulse stumbled. "I just meant, no." "Say it again." The room suddenly felt too small to breathe in. I wrapped my arms around myself tightly, trying to hold my nerves together. "I do not want to fight." Darren stared at me another long moment before finally exhaling through his nose and backing away. That scared me more than yelling ever did. Quiet Darren meant unpredictable Darren. You know what, he said calmly. Maybe this is good. I frowned slightly. What? Maybe your creepy billionaire friend can pay your half of the rent too. He grabbed his jacket from the couch and headed toward the door. Where are you going? Out. It is almost 3 in the morning. His hand paused on the doorknob. Maybe you should call Mr. Moretti if you are scared. Then he left. The apartment shook softly when the door slammed behind him. I stood frozen in the kitchen long after his footsteps disappeared down the hallway. My chest hurt in that familiar, exhausting way it always did after these conversations. Not panic exactly. Worse. The slow ache of realizing someone keeps finding new ways to make you feel small. I sank onto the edge of the couch and stared at the bracelet again. For the wrist you keep hiding. Nobody had ever looked closely enough to notice before. Not really. Friends saw excuses. Coworkers saw makeup and long sleeves. My own mother thought Darren was protective. But Caius Moretti looked at one bruise for less than 3 seconds and somehow understood everything I had spent months trying to bury. That realization should have terrified me. Instead, it made my throat tighten unexpectedly. My phone buzzed beside me around 3:30. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. Silence answered first. Then a low, familiar voice. Did he hurt you tonight? I sat upright instantly. What? Answer the question, Celine. Caius. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it physically hurt. I lowered my voice automatically, even though I was alone. How did you get this number? Did he hurt you? Same calm tone. Same terrifying patience. I looked toward the dark apartment hallway. No, a pause. Soft breathing through the speaker. You are lying again. I closed my eyes. Why do you care? Another silence stretched between us. Longer this time. He sounded tired when he finally spoke. Not physically tired. Soul tired. Because 5 years ago, he said quietly, someone I loved kept saying she was fine too. The line went silent for one devastating second before he added, and I believed her. Sleep never came after that phone call. I stayed curled against the corner of my couch while dawn slowly turned the apartment windows pale gray, replaying Caius Moretti's voice over and over inside my head. And I believed her. For words. Quiet words. But they carried the weight of a man who had buried something he never recovered from. Around 6 in the morning, I finally stood and walked into the bathroom. The overhead light was too harsh for that hour. My reflection looked exhausted. Smudged mascara beneath my eyes. Hair tangled from nervous fingers running through it all night. I rolled my sleeve up slowly and stared at the bruises circling my wrist. Purple fading into yellow at the edges now. Evidence. Proof. Something I had spent months pretending did not matter. Beside the sink sat the velvet bracelet box. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I opened it again. Silver caught the bathroom light softly. Delicate. Elegant. Careful. Not the kind of gift a man like Caius Moretti should know how to choose. I touched the engraved words once before shutting the box quickly. By 10:30, I was back at Bellamy's Steakhouse preparing for another double shift. The restaurant buzzed with the usual Saturday chaos. Servers balancing trays. Bartenders shouting drink orders. The smell of garlic butter and expensive whiskey hanging heavy in the air. Normally the noise distracted me enough to breathe. Not today. Every time the front doors opened, my stomach tightened automatically. You look terrible, my coworker Nina whispered while rolling silverware beside me. Thanks. No, seriously. Did you sleep at all? I forced a smile. A little. She studied me another second before her expression softened. Your boyfriend came by earlier. My hand stopped folding napkins instantly. What? Around 9. Asking if you were working today. Cold slid down my spine. What did you tell him? That you started at 11. Nina frowned slightly. Celine, is everything okay? Fine. Automatic. Always automatic. She clearly did not believe me, but before she could push further, the lunch rush hit. For the next few hours I buried myself in work. Smile. Serve drinks. Refill waters. Pretend my chest did not tighten every time my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Darren sent 8 texts before noon. We need to talk. Answer me. Do not embarrass me again. The last message simply read, I am coming there. My appetite disappeared instantly. Around 1:15, the restaurant doors swung open hard enough to silence half the room. Darren walked in wearing dark jeans and the same gray jacket from last night. His eyes found me immediately near the bar. My pulse stumbled hard. Nina looked between us nervously. That him? I grabbed my tray before she could say anything else. I can handle it. Lie. Darren smiled the second I approached, but it looked forced and strange around the edges. Baby. His voice was too loud. Too friendly. Can we talk outside? I am working. Then take 5 minutes. Several nearby customers glanced over uncomfortably. Heat crawled into my neck. Please do not do this here. His smile tightened. Do what? Before I could answer, his hand closed lightly around my injured wrist beneath the tray. Not enough to hurt. Enough to warn. My breath caught anyway. Darren noticed immediately. See, he muttered softly. Now you act scared every time I touch you. Let go. You are making me look like some kind of villain. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm. Too crowded. I tried pulling my arm back carefully without spilling the drinks balanced on the tray. Darren stepped closer instead. Did you tell that rich psycho I hurt you? Nobody said your name. But he knows. His fingers tightened slightly. Panic fluttered sharply beneath my ribs. Then a deep, familiar voice cut cleanly through the restaurant behind him. Take your hand off her. Silence crashed across the dining room instantly. Darren turned first. So did everyone else. Near the entrance stood Caius Moretti in a charcoal overcoat darkened slightly by rain. Pale green eyes fixed directly on Darren's hand around my wrist. Every conversation in the restaurant died completely. Even the kitchen noise seemed to disappear. Caius stepped forward slowly, controlled in that terrifying way only powerful men could be. Not loud. Not emotional. Worse. Calm. Dead calm. You have exactly one chance, he said quietly. To let her go before I decide you no longer deserve the privilege of using your hands at all. For one horrible second, nobody moved. Darren's fingers loosened from my wrist almost immediately, but the damage was already done. Every customer in Bellamy's had seen it. The fear, the tension, the way my body reacted before my mind could hide it. Caius Moretti kept walking toward us with slow measured steps that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat. His pale green eyes never left Darren. You do not get to touch her again, he said quietly. Darren straightened defensively. This is between me and my girlfriend. No, Caius replied. It stopped being private the moment she started hiding bruises. The entire restaurant went dead silent again. I wanted to disappear. Every stare in the room felt sharp against my skin. Darren laughed nervously, but it sounded forced. You rich people really think you can buy your way into anything. Caius stopped beside me then. Close enough that I caught the faint scent of cedarwood and rain again. He glanced briefly toward my wrist before looking back at Darren. This has nothing to do with money. Then what does it have to do with? Something cold flickered behind Caius's expression. Not anger exactly. Memory. Regret. The word landed strangely between them. Darren frowned slightly, clearly confused, but before he could answer, Caius reached into his coat pocket and placed a folded white handkerchief gently beside my tray. My eyes dropped to it automatically. Embroidered initials in dark thread. C. M. Your wrist is bleeding again, he said softly enough that only I heard it. I looked down in surprise. He was right. A thin line of red marked the edge of my sleeve where Darren's grip had reopened cracked skin beneath the bruise. Heat rushed into my face instantly. Caius turned back toward Darren before I could speak. Leave. Darren scoffed. Or what? Two men in dark suits stepped inside the restaurant entrance at that exact moment. I had not even noticed them arrive. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Darren saw them and finally understood something important. This was not a normal man standing in front of him. This was the kind of man entire rooms adjusted themselves around. Darren swallowed visibly before forcing another laugh. You know what? Fine. She is clearly enjoying the attention. He looked at me sharply. Call me when you are done playing damsel in distress. Then he walked out into the rain without another word. The restaurant stayed silent long after the door slammed shut behind him. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the tray. Caius noticed immediately. Take 5 minutes, he said. I am fine. No, he replied calmly. You are trying very hard to appear fine. That stupid ache rose in my throat again. I hated that he kept seeing through me. My manager suddenly appeared beside us, practically sweating nervousness. Mr. Moretti, your usual table is available if you would like lunch. On the house, of course. Caius barely looked at him. I am not here to eat. His gaze stayed on me instead. Sit down before you fall down. I opened my mouth to protest. but the room tilted slightly beneath me before I could. Exhaustion hit all at once. No sleep. Too much adrenaline. Too much fear packed into too few days. Caius caught my elbow gently before I lost balance entirely. The entire restaurant stared harder. His hand steadied me with impossible care. Not controlling. Not possessive. Careful. Like he was handling something breakable. Easy, he murmured quietly. I hated how much that single word affected me. He guided me toward an empty booth near the back windows while the staff pretended not to watch. Outside, rain streaked down the glass in silver rivers. Caius slid into the seat across from me without removing his coat. Up close, he looked exhausted. Faint shadows beneath his eyes. A tiny scar near his jaw I had not noticed before. The face of a man who probably had not slept peacefully in years. Why are you doing this? I whispered finally. Because I know what happens when nobody intervenes. I looked down at the untouched handkerchief between us. You do not even know me. His eyes held mine steadily. I know fear when I see it. Silence stretched softly across the booth. Then his expression changed slightly, as if remembering something painful. My sister used to hide bruises under sweaters too, he said quietly. Until one day she stopped coming home at all. The noise of the restaurant slowly returned around us after that, but it sounded distant somehow. Plates clattered. Glasses chimed softly. Conversations restarted in careful whispers. Yet inside the booth near the rain-covered windows, everything felt strangely still. I could not stop staring at Caius after what he said about his sister. There had been no performance in his voice. No manipulation. Just grief that had learned how to wear expensive suits in silence. He looked away first, eyes settling briefly on the storm outside. You should not have come here today, I whispered. A faint humorless smile touched his mouth. I was told you were bleeding through your sleeve while pretending nothing was wrong. Who told you that? You would be surprised what people notice when they are afraid of disappointing me. That answer should have unsettled me. Instead, I found myself studying his face again. The scar near his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes, the exhaustion that clung to him, even sitting perfectly still. Men like Caius Moretti were supposed to look untouchable, invincible. But sitting across from him now, I saw something else entirely. Loneliness. Deep enough to hollow someone out from the inside. A waitress hurried past our booth carrying martinis, nearly slipping on the polished floor before catching herself. Caius's hand moved instinctively toward the edge of the table, like he was prepared to steady falling things before they shattered. The tiny movement tightened something unexpectedly in my chest. You really have not left your mansion in years. I asked softly. He glanced at me carefully. People talk too much. So that is a yes. His gaze drifted back toward the rain. The city became loud after my sister died. What was her name? Silence stretched for a moment. Vivian. The name sounded sacred coming from him. She loved piano music. Used to play every morning loud enough to wake the entire house. A faint shadow crossed his expression. After she was gone, the silence felt easier. I swallowed hard. I am sorry. Caius nodded once, but said nothing else. My shift manager approached the booth nervously a minute later, holding my coat. Celine, you can head home early if you need to. His eyes darted toward Caius, almost fearfully. We are covered tonight. I frowned slightly. I still have 4 hours left. You are done for the day, Caius said calmly before my manager could answer. I did not ask you to decide that. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. You are exhausted. That is not your business. Your bruises became my business the second he made you afraid to breathe. Heat rushed into my face instantly. Caius noticed and leaned back slightly, studying me with frustrating calm. You dislike being taken care of. I dislike people making decisions for me. Something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. Respect maybe. Fair enough. He stood then, tall enough that the entire booth seemed smaller around him. Come with me. My pulse skipped. Where? Somewhere quieter than this. I barely know you. That is probably wise. He offered me my coat anyway. Outside the restaurant, the rain had softened into mist drifting beneath the streetlights. A black car waited at the curb with Dominic standing beside it. The city hummed around us in wet reflections and distant sirens. I hesitated near the sidewalk. If I leave with you, I said carefully, people are going to assume things. Caius looked down at me for one long, quiet moment. Celine. His voice lowered slightly. Anyone who sees the way you look at every sudden movement already knows something is wrong. My chest tightened painfully. He opened the car door before adding, softer this time. I am not asking you to trust me completely. Rainwater glimmered against the dark wool of his coat beneath the streetlights. Just enough to stop surviving everything alone. I stared at him while the city blurred around us in silver and gold. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across Manhattan. And for reasons I still did not understand, standing beside one of the most feared men in New York suddenly felt less dangerous than going back to my apartment alone. The inside of Caius Moretti's car was so quiet, it almost felt unreal after the noise of the city. Rain drifted softly across the windows while Manhattan glowed outside in blurred gold streaks and red brake lights. Dominic drove without speaking. Caius sat beside me in the back seat with one hand resting loosely against his knee, staring out at the storm like he carried memories too heavy to set down. I kept waiting for him to say something controlling, something possessive. Some version of you belonged to me now. Men with power always wanted ownership eventually. But Caius stayed silent nearly the entire drive. And somehow that unsettled me more. 20 minutes later, the gates of Moretti Manor opened slowly in front of us again. Tall iron. Stone walls slick with rain. The mansion windows glowing warm against the darkness beyond the trees. The first time I came here, the estate felt like a prison built for ghosts. Tonight it felt lonelier. Dominic opened my door beneath a black umbrella while Caius walked ahead up the stone steps, without waiting for anyone to follow. Like he already trusted the house itself to obey him. Inside, the mansion smelled faintly of cedarwood and fireplace smoke. Most of the lights were dim except for soft golden lamps along the hallway. Somewhere in the distance, I heard piano music drifting through the enormous house. Slow, careful, beautiful enough to make my chest ache unexpectedly. I stopped walking. Who is playing? Caius glanced back over his shoulder. Nobody. I can hear it. Automatic recording. His voice lowered slightly. Vivian used to play that piece every winter. Something about the way he said her name made the mansion finally make sense to me. The silence. The darkness. The untouched perfection everywhere. This was not a home. It was a shrine to grief. Caius led me toward a sitting room near the east wing, where a fire crackled softly beneath marble walls lined with old photographs. I noticed immediately that every picture of Vivian looked alive in a way Caius no longer did. Laughing beside a piano, dancing barefoot in a garden, smiling with the same pale green eyes as her brother. She looks kind, I whispered. Caius stood beside the fireplace for a long moment before answering. She trusted people too easily. There was no anger in his voice, only blame directed inward. I wrapped my arms around myself tightly. What happened to her? Silence stretched through the room while rain tapped softly against the windows. Caius stared into the fire instead of at me. She married a man who convinced her that love meant enduring everything quietly. My throat tightened instantly. Caius, I knew something was wrong. His jaw flexed once. But every time I asked, she smiled and told me she was happy. He looked at me then, straight through me. By the time she admitted the truth, it was too late. The room felt painfully still. I glanced down at my bruised wrist instinctively, and Caius noticed immediately. He always noticed. That is why you keep interfering, I said softly. You think if you save someone else, maybe you can stop blaming yourself. Something flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Not anger. Recognition. You are smarter than you pretend to be, Celine. And you are sadder than you pretend to be. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Caius stared at me for one long, quiet second. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed softly under his breath. Not mocking, just surprised. Nobody speaks to me that way. Maybe nobody else is honest with you. The fire crackled between us while the old piano recording drifted faintly through the mansion halls. For the first time since meeting him, Caius looked less like a feared empire built in human form and more like a man carrying unbearable loneliness behind expensive clothes. My phone buzzed suddenly inside my coat pocket. Darren. Again. The screen lit up with 12 missed calls and 6 new messages. Where are you? Answer me. Who are you with? Caius watched my expression change carefully. He tracks your location, does not he? I froze. How do you know that? Because Dominic found the tracker hidden in your purse 20 minutes ago. My blood turned cold instantly. Caius reached into his coat pocket calmly and placed a tiny black AirTag on the table between us beside the fire. You were never going home safely tonight, he said quietly. Not without someone following you there first. For a second, I could not breathe at all. The tiny black tracker sat on the coffee table beside the fire like proof of every fear I had spent months minimizing inside my own head. Darren knew where I worked, where I slept, where I walked after late shifts. My stomach twisted so sharply I pressed a hand against it instinctively. How long was that in my bag? I whispered. Caius leaned back slowly in the armchair across from me, shadows from the fireplace flickering across the sharp lines of his face. Long enough for him to know where you are whenever he wants. Rain whispered softly against the tall mansion windows. Somewhere deeper in the house, Vivian's piano recording continued drifting through the silence like a ghost refusing to leave. I stared at the tracker again. I thought he was just worried. Caius's expression tightened slightly at that. Men who love you do not monitor you like property. The word property landed harder than it should have. Because deep down, part of me already knew that. I just never wanted to say it out loud. My phone buzzed again across the table. Another message from Darren. You are embarrassing me. Come home now. Caius glanced toward the screen briefly before looking back at me. You do not have to answer him. You do not understand. Then explain it to me. His voice stayed calm, gentle almost, which somehow made honesty feel more dangerous. I looked down at my trembling hands. He was not always like this. My throat tightened painfully. At first he just wanted to know I got home safe. Then he wanted my passwords, because couples should not hide things. Then he started getting angry if I worked late. If I talked to male customers too long. If I wore anything he thought attracted attention. I swallowed hard. Every time I tried to push back, he apologized afterward. He always apologized. Caius listened without interrupting once. Completely still. Completely focused. And eventually, I whispered, you get so tired of fighting that you start adjusting yourself smaller and smaller just to keep the peace. The fire cracked softly between us. Caius lowered his eyes briefly before speaking. Vivian used to say almost the exact same thing. My chest ached hearing that. I am sorry. He looked at me steadily across the room. Stop apologizing for surviving. Silence settled again, but it no longer felt sharp. Just sad. Honest. Real. I leaned back against the couch slowly, exhaustion finally catching up to me all at once. The warmth of the fireplace. The storm outside. The impossible quiet of a house that had not known peace in years. My eyes drifted toward the piano room visible through the open hallway arch. Did you really stop living after she died? I asked softly. Caius stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. I stopped allowing myself things that could be taken away. Something fragile shifted inside me hearing that. Because I understood it more than I wanted to. Fear changes people slowly. It teaches you to expect loss before happiness even arrives. My eyes grew heavy despite myself. I had not slept properly in days. Caius noticed immediately. Of course he did. You are exhausted, he murmured. There is a guest room upstairs prepared for you. My head lifted quickly. I should go home tomorrow. Tomorrow is not tonight. Darren will lose his mind if I disappear. Caius's expression hardened slightly at that. Good. The answer startled a small laugh out of me before I could stop it. Real laughter. Tiny. Rusted from disuse. Caius looked almost surprised hearing it. Then something softened in his face, so briefly I nearly imagined it. There it is, he said quietly. What? The person you were before fear taught you to apologize for existing. My chest tightened painfully again. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Like I was someone worth protecting instead of managing. Caius stood slowly and crossed the room toward the fireplace. Firelight caught against the silver threaded through his dark hair, while rain painted moving shadows across the walls behind him. For the first time since entering Moretti Manor, the mansion no longer felt haunted. It felt wounded. Like the man standing in front of the fire. Caius looked back at me over his shoulder, pale green eyes steady in the dim light. Stay tonight, Celine. His voice lowered slightly. Not because I want to control you. The storm rolled softly outside the windows while Vivian's piano echoed faintly through the halls. Stay because nobody should have to feel afraid every time they close their own front door.